You have cancer. Those are 3 words no one ever wants to hear in their lives. Unfortunately, according to the American Cancer Society website, in the United States, 1 in 2 men and 1 in 3 women will develop cancer in their life. We've all been touched with it in some way or another, whether you've had it or you know somebody who's had it. I've talked before about my mother, my godmother, and my other family and friends who lived with cancer, and it leaves quite the impact on the individual and those around them. Then came along the COVID-19 pandemic. This brought up a number of added variables to the equation. Those who were going through treatments and had compromised immune systems now had to worry about this new disease on top of what they were already going through. Patients would visit their doctors less because of fear of contracting something anytime they enter a doctor's office or hospital. Family members could not be there for their loved ones as they went through treatments and procedures. Cancer, along with any diagnosis, can make anyone feel alone. Add COVID-19 on top of that, you have to ask, where do you go from here? Even in a pre-pandemic circumstance, many cancer patients have to live a double life. The life they knew before and are trying to maintain, and the life where they are living with cancer. Some may see it as having a secret identity, what they try to show to the world versus what they try to keep to themselves. That may be the way some patients feel, but I'd like to say that it's simply 2 sides of a coin for a superhero. The bravery, the courage, the strength, the resilience are all heroic, and those traits power through in all aspects of their lives. It may push people to their limits, but remember, under the greatest pressure, diamonds are formed. To re-emphasize a point that Nick Lippers from the American Cancer Society made while he was on several episodes ago, the pandemic also put a halt on research and awareness. So much of the momentum in regards to scientific and cultural breakthroughs were reduced, and much progress will be stinted for a while. Though the ways we approach our daily lives and events are different, it does not mean that we can't find new ways to advocate and make the importance known. And one of the best ways to do that is to tell our stories. Aileen Burke has been a good friend of mine for a few years now. Before we officially met, I saw her perform at the St. Rose Theater. Her voice, her stage presence, and her charisma were astounding. And then the following year, we had the opportunity to work together on a show, and the rest was history. Getting to know Aileen through college, I know that she is one of the brightest, strongest, bravest, and kindest individuals I've ever known. From her work on the stage, to her work as a student, to her journalism and writing, Aileen is a gifted storyteller. Thank you very much for tuning in to another episode of Walsh Wednesday, the Reflective Series. Today's guest is Aileen Burke. Aileen has an upcoming memoir called Blueberries, a collection of moments from a collegiate cancer patient. Today, she sits down with us to discuss many of her experiences in regards to juggling her life as a college student alongside her cancer diagnosis and treatments. All that right after this. I want to say thank you to all the listeners out there. Whether you're listening to this podcast, to my album Away From Home and other releases, and simply just following along with whatever I have to offer. I mentioned this before, but this podcast is kind of like my therapy. I get to talk about subjects that mean a lot to me, and I get to share the stories of incredible people. Any and every little bit of support has been appreciated, and I love the little community that we've carved out for ourselves. Obviously, there are so many ways to support, but I suggest checking out my Patreon page and perhaps purchasing my album on Bandcamp or downloading it wherever you choose to listen to your music. And of course, word of mouth. All of y'all being helpers and telling others what we have going on here means a lot. And hey, if there's anything or anyone you might want to hear on this podcast, let me know. So, thank you from the bottom of my heart. After a year like 2020, I have no idea what 2021 has in store, but I look forward to tackling it all with you. Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Right now, I am speaking with one of my good friends from college, Aileen Burke. Aileen, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. I don't know. We've already been talking for a while, so I'm in a great mood.
We got started. We met each other through the St. Rose Theater. That was Farndale was our first show together, right?
That we did. That we did. Yes, Farndale, which is the most lovely and interesting fever dream to this date that I have ever experienced. Whenever I think about Farndale, I think about, oh God, do you remember that one day where you were playing like a Bach funeral dirge on the piano? And
Yes.
I was like, oh, I love this. My mother used to play this for me as a lullaby when I was a child. And just for 5 minutes, we were just totally doing improv comedy. And for some reason, no one stopped us. Yeah, it was a good time.
Yeah, that was fun. I do remember that. And you're right, Farndale. Well, Farndale's a Christmas Carol. It's a spoof of a Christmas Carol. And for all you guys who are confused, like what the hell is Farndale? It's a spoof of a Christmas Carol where they were supposed to be putting on a production of it, and all their main actors get lost in the snow. So we have to put it on with like 5 people, and it's a mess. And it's one of those everything can go wrong, should go wrong, and will go wrong kind of shows. I think Fever Dream is a great way to explain it. One, the show itself, but how we put on the show.
It had natural, almost slapstick elements like written into it. But for some reason, the group of people that we did the show with, just everything was so heightened. It was very funny. And years down the road, Dr. Clancy, who was a political science professor at the school, he would always come see the shows at the theater. And years later, we would do different things and musicals and, you know, heavy things with heavier themes. And until I graduated, he always said, he was like, and Farndale, I will never get over how creative that director was, how the bed was just a piece of wood with a head hole cut into it to make it look like the Scrooge was sleeping in bed. Shout out to Melissa, miss you. But to make it look like Scrooge was sleeping in bed, he thought that was the most genius thing. He loved it. He loved that show.
My grandmother still talks about that show all the time. In my head, in the doorway is Jacob Marley and how I couldn't get my head out of it. And that was hilarious. And one of my favorite things, like slapstick wise, and this wasn't even supposed to happen. On one of the nights, somebody didn't take a prop off of the set, and it just kind of sat there for a while. So we didn't turn on the lights. I ran out. I took care of it, but then I had to run back around outside the theater to get to my spot again, which I had to be in 5 seconds. And I played it off as if it was supposed to be part of the show, where I'm out of breath. And I purposely was like,
it was so good. It was so good. It was so good. And for people who don't, the theater that we were in, it was a barn to a carriage house in Albany. So when Conor's saying he had to run around the theater, he didn't mean on like a catwalk or anything. He had to bust out of a door in the back, run on like a sidewalk out in the elements, and then
in the snow. It was snowy.
Yeah, he had to actually physically run around the entire building in order to come on for the next scene, which is the funniest thing. But then, I mean, after that show, you know, we just became friends. You become friends with people working on shows all the time. And we always were, you know, we would always see each other and always at the right time, which is my favorite part of our friendship. You know, we didn't necessarily see each other for a while, and then we would see each other again. And then we did Last Ditch. Yeah, which was also a time.
It's funny that you should say that. That was like the biggest thing that we did act together. Well, then there was at the same time there was the Shakespeare Cabaret. That was a little smaller, though. That wasn't like scenes together by any means. We were together in that. And Last Ditch. That, oh my gosh, Last Ditch with Joyce. That was an experience.
That is something like I will probably never do again in my life. And that sounds negative, but I mean, like, legitimately, we had a friend who just took pretty much 2 cameras and made all 3 episodes sitcom, which is abundantly creative, and I just genuinely don't think that's something I will have the opportunity to do again in my life. And it was all of our closest friends pretty much from the theater, which was the funniest part. That most of the talent from the show came from the theater, and even the actors who weren't quote unquote from the theater, they were still very funny. They were great. So that was a fun time. That show had interesting wardrobe, interesting premise, interesting across the board. It was just fun. It was just fun to do. 10 o'clock at night.
I love the air that you brought to your character, and just kind of like the voice, and it's like, I don't know what you mean, and just
the funniest part about that character is that she, over the summer before it had been cast or anything, she pretty much said she had a part for me that was written like specifically for me, and that was Juliette. And so I, just because I think she had said it that way subconsciously, I was like, I need to make this character the exact opposite of who I am. And so I was like, I'm just gonna talk like this and not really pay too much attention. That's what I'm gonna do. And that was another thing that, I mean, I don't know if this is necessarily the best way to segue into the rest of the conversation, but I was doing that at the same time that I was traveling back and forth to Pennsylvania for infusion. So that was very interesting.
As odd as this sounds, and correct me if this comes off insensitive or wrong, you kind of played dual characters in your own life, where you had this one aspect of things with your treatments, while then you were playing the role of Aileen, the very active, positive college student.
Yeah, I don't think that's insensitive or wrong at all, because it definitely felt that way. And still, I mean, up until this point, I almost feel like I have this identity of where it's Aileen the cancer patient, and Aileen the everything else. And it was tough to balance at times. It was tough to balance at times because it seemed like, and I mean, this is especially the deal during infusion. Everything's fun. Like, people would want to, oh, well, you know, we'll meet up, we'll go here, we'll go out, we'll do this. Like, the weekends that everyone was free, those were the weekends I had to haul my cookies to Pennsylvania. And I was like, and I mean, for a while when it first started, I wasn't telling anybody. And I was doing a lot of trips to Pennsylvania where I was going to and from Pennsylvania in the same day, or I was in Pennsylvania on a Friday and I was back by Saturday morning for rehearsal, because I didn't want too many people worrying about what was happening, and I didn't want anything at school to change as a result of what I had going on. Because at the time I was diagnosed, I was news editor for the Chronicle. We were working on a show, you know, I just had a bunch of stuff going on for school. I think I was taking like 18 credits that semester or something. And I just knew that there were going to be a couple people who started to see me differently, and just who would have started to treat me differently based off of what I had going on. And I didn't want to know who they were, first and foremost, and I didn't want any exceptions to be made for me, because at the heart of it all, I was a student. I was working a retail job, and I was not really interested in letting cancer consume my whole identity. Yeah, that's what it was. So I think the dual life thing is very appropriate, actually, and I've never even thought about it that way, but that's definitely what it felt like.
For anybody out there, as Aileen said, she was doing a lot of things, and from the experience that I know, Aileen is like one of the strongest people I know, one of the most active people I know, one of the most positive people I know. So, you know, absolutely incredible, all of the things that you accomplish, and considering before and after and all that. Let's kind of take it back to the beginning there. You were doing all these things with the Chronicle, with the shows. Tell us about those early days getting diagnosed, what that
Mhm.
experience was like. You were telling me about the experience with the doctor and how that's kind of unique.
Poor the poor physician's assistant, that poor guy. I think I really got to take it even further back than the diagnosis. But what
Okay.
happened was, because this is going to be my PSA to check your skin, because people forget that skin is an organ. Those can have cancer cells too. So I had this. I'm like a moley person, but I had this mole like dead center in the middle of my chin that was shaped and colored so like strangely that I almost thought that it was a pimple. So I just like took it right off my face, and it grew back and it got big. And I was like, I guess I'm just cursed to have this ugly mole on my face. Like, that's it. Never, not even one time in my mind was I like, oh, like it could be skin cancer. Like, I really should look into that. But what happened was I hadn't seen my parents that much that semester. So they came up for Songs for a New World in the theater, and I was singing, and the way my mom describes it, light just hit my face a certain way, and you could like really see the mole like sticking off of my face. And she was like, that was not there when you left in August. Like, that is a strange thing. And we let it go, and we were going to schedule a dermatologist appointment. And then I came home for winter break, and my mom's a dental hygienist, and she was cleaning my teeth, and she went to put her hand on my chin to like balance the tool, and it hurt. I like jumped with pain on when she touched my chin. And she was like, that's where that mole is. I don't like that. So Maureen did some artistic telling of the truth. And by that, I mean lying. And she was like, it's pessing and it's bleeding and whatever, to like get the dermatologist to see me as soon as possible, because the next available appointment for him to look at this mole on my face would have been in April of that year. And I had received my diagnosis in March. So we're talking about not even having had looked at the mole by a month after I had received my diagnosis, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So everything, the whole timeline would have been pushed back. And then at that point, with 4 or 5 extra months of the cancer going undetected, we don't know really what that would have looked like. So I get the mole taken off. I was back in the dorms at St. Rose. I was hanging out with Tyler Bushy, actually. I would always hang out in his room with a couple of the people in his building because he was an RA, and we were just chilling. And my mom called me. We're just messing around. So I pick up the phone. I'm like, hey, Mom, what's going on? And she goes, honey, I'm on a 3-way call right now with Dr. Levin, who we hadn't heard from. So I just figured the letter saying everything was sent to my house. And then I had nothing to worry about. But Dr. Levin, he goes, so we sent your sample to a lab, and the results were inconclusive. So we sent it to another lab, and the results were inconclusive. So we sent it to a third lab, and the mole on your face is either a really, really irritated mole, or it's like melanoma, for sure. And there's no in between. So I instantaneously start crying, because if you have to consider that it's melanoma in my mind, then that's what it is, right? So March 15th comes around, Ides of March, ooh, spooky. And I go, this is after, everything's been removed. They took broader margins, which gave me my lovely fetching chin strap, as I refer to it. And they checked my lymph nodes. So we go in, and my surgeon was on vacation in Aruba. So I was seeing his physician's assistant, and he came in and he was like, I'm really sorry. Like, he was all quiet. I'm really, really sorry. But we tested everything, and it is cancer, and we don't know how far along it is necessarily, but we think we got all of the lymph nodes out that were cancer. But it'll be stage 3 melanoma, and we have to schedule you for a multidisciplinary clinic, and you're gonna go see Dr. my guy, Dr. Nair, who I love, but I didn't know him then. You're gonna go see Dr. Nair. Like, I'm just really sorry. And my instantaneous reaction, I laughed at this man. I was like, ha ha, what? And I threw up 2 peace signs, and I just looked at my mom, and I just started laughing. I was like, I literally said, I was like, I do not have time for this. I have no time for this. I need you to schedule an MRI right now. We got to make sure it's not my brain. I don't have time for brain cancer. I don't have time for anything. I'm in school. I'm trying to graduate on time. I am not paying the College of St. Rose money for an extra semester. I was so determined I overshot and I graduated a semester early on accident, but that's a story for another time. So I was screaming at this PA, like screaming. And I just went through the 7 stages of grief in 5 minutes. And we got out, and then they were scheduling my MRI. And they start asking you this barrage of questions before you go for a test where it's like, oh, like your kidneys hurt, like what color is your blood, like how do you have a bionic leg, like all these different things. That they just go through the questions. And then they got to the question where they ask you before a scan, have you ever been diagnosed with cancer? And for the first time in my life, the answer to that question was yes. When were you diagnosed with cancer? 5 minutes ago. And I just fell on the floor of the waiting room, my eyes out. Because in that moment, I realized that no matter how this went for me, there was going to be a before and there was going to be an after. And my mom finished the rest of the questions because I certainly wasn't finishing them. But that was the before and after moment. And then we got in the car and, you know, the radio's on really quiet in my mom's Jeep and she's just trying to drive and she's looking out the window and, you know, she's looking back at me and, she's trying to find the right thing to say, right? Because what do you say really to your 20-year-old who just got diagnosed with like mid to later stage cancer? Like that's not in the parenting books for kids. And she's just looking and she's looking away. And she looks at me and she goes, I told you. I was like, wait, what? She was like, no, I'm not going to say it. I was like, no, you say it now. Like, what do you mean? What did you tell me? She said, I told you you're supposed to eat blueberries. I told you because blueberries have antioxidants and maybe that would have helped. Maybe it would have helped if you ate blueberries. And I just laughed so hard because it's just a known fact in my family that I have no tolerance for eating fruit. I have no use for it. I have a texture thing. I think it's gross. I can have a fruit smoothie, no problem, if it's all blended up. But chewing on a blueberry and having it like be juicy in my mouth, like that's not it. That ain't it, Chief. So the first thing my loving mother did after I was diagnosed with stage 3 melanoma was she shamed me for not eating blueberries. Then I was like, we had a good laugh about it. And then I started thinking about, we have to start telling people because I told a couple people, because I had surgery over spring break and I came back to school with this big scar on my chin that looked a lot worse than it did now. Now it looks pretty okay. And I was lucky because in upstate New York, it's cold pretty much until late April. So I came back from winter break and I borrowed, my sister has this big blanket scarf. And I wore that scarf every day up to my nose, pretty much, even in class. So people could see the scars. I did that for about 3 weeks. And then there was this freak day where it was 60 degrees out and I couldn't wear the scarf anymore. And I took it off and people were like, did you like fall on ice or something? And then that was fun because I got to look them dead in the face and go, no, I have cancer. But back to the diagnosing thing. I'm in the car with my mom. We laugh about the blueberry shaming. She goes, okay, so let's say hypothetically you have to tell 50 people what's going on. Minimum 50, because I have a big family. I have friends. I'm very fortunate to have people who care about me. You have to tell 50 people that you are going through this. And if you spend 5 minutes being upset with each person, crying with each person, 50 times 5, I said 500 before, but I don't think that's the right number. 50 times 5, 250. 250, whatever. I was just double checking. But in that situation, she said 500 in the car because I'll never forget that in my life. She said 500. That's a substantial amount of time you're going to spend crying with each person. And that's a substantial amount of time in your life you're not going to get back. So we kind of made this decision together in the car on that day that we were going to worry about it when they told us we should be worrying. From the get out, they were very hopeful. And of course, it was upsetting news, but we just decided that we were going to have this outlook and maybe not tell everybody or tell people when I was ready. Yeah, we just kind of went from there. We just, as cheesy as it sounds, and I've never really said it out loud this way before, but at that point, we didn't know if my prognosis was like awesome or not. In the case that we did have limited time, we weren't going to spend it being sad. And that was a very long story, but that's what it was like. And then I pretty much went back up to school, and I had to start telling people because I didn't know what it was going to look like or how it was going to impact my schedule because all of my doctors were in Pennsylvania. School obviously was in Albany. So that's when I started telling people, and that's when I started seeing how different people reacted to cancer diagnoses and how many people take cancer diagnoses and attach it to their own mortality or their own experiences or just what they affiliate with cancer. So one of the last people I called, I kind of said like, yeah, like, you know, like it's cancer. We don't know how far along it is yet, but you know what? I'm hopeful. And he goes, oh, hey, that's not good. My grandmother died from that cancer.
That's not something you really like hearing.
Right. But it's like, it's just what came to his mind.
It's
right?
his way of trying to relate, but it's not the best thing to say.
Right. And I mean, there's not necessarily a right or wrong thing to say. So something that I had a very, very dear family friend who had cancer, fought cancer. I try not to say fight, but lived with cancer for a very long while, much longer than she should have given her diagnosis. And she would talk to me about her experience with cancer. I'm guessing more so than a lot of people because I'm very close friends with her sister now. And there were certain things that she didn't know, but we would talk about, if that makes sense. And she said to me once, and it's something that I kind of borrow now, when life gives someone lemons, don't tell them about your uncle's second cousin's wife who died from lemons. That's not it. Like, it's not going to do anything. When life gives someone lemons, do not tell them about your roommate from college's girlfriend who also has lemons. What does that do for that person? It doesn't do much. It lets them, oh, they have lemons too. That's really tough for them. But I'm trying to talk about my lemons. Can you hear me out about my lemons? And then it was just interesting because there were some people, like my one professor at the time, I told her and what was happening, and she kind of went, okay. And I was like, do you have any questions? Do you is there anything, whatever? Like, I just told you I had cancer. And she was like, uh-huh. And I was like, okay, I'll show myself out. Like, that's fine. That's cool. That's good. And then there were other people. Another professor who I will name by name. It was Kaylin. Kaylin cried, and that made me cry because seeing Kaylin upset is the worst thing in the world. Made me cry. And her instantaneous thing, because I had an independent study set up with her for the fall of that year. So this is in the spring. She instantly started grabbing books off of her bookshelf in her office. And she gave me a stack of books like this big. And she, for reference, it was like the size of half of a Subway foot long, so like 6 inches for the people who can't see because I forgot that this is a podcast and not a video. She gave me a stack of books and she said, I'm giving these to you because you're going to be here reading them next fall, okay? Like, I want you to get a jump start on your reading because you're going to be doing this independent study with me in the fall. And there were just so many different reactions to the initial the initial diagnosis, it was very interesting. And that's when I started formulating my own thoughts about everything that was going on. But still at that same time, because of the infusion I was on, once things got started, people still didn't know unless I told them, because I wasn't on chemo. I was on this thing called immunotherapy, which I don't know if you have questions about that.
Actually, I was going to ask if you can go into that a little bit, because that is something that a lot of people aren't aware of when it comes to treatment these days. When they think of cancer treatment, they think of the chemotherapy and how that beats up on your body, and very often the loss of hair and things along those lines. So I feel that's something that, not in the dark necessarily, but it's still relatively new, that a lot of people haven't quite caught up on it. So could you go into a little bit of detail on it, at least a general overview about it, if you could?
Yeah, definitely. Because the hard science of it, of course, I don't understand.
Of course.
That's what would be, my sister would be good for that, because we went to a melanoma community dinner between my hospital system, which is Lehigh Valley Health Network, and they're partners with Memorial Sloan Kettering in Manhattan. So they had Sloan doctors come in and explain the actual science of the infusion that I was taking. Everyone at the dinner got a notebook and a pen, and everyone just kind of like put it away, like, oh, this is so nice, like, thank you. And as this presentation is going on, my little sister is furiously scribbling down notes about how fascinating this all is, because she works in healthcare, so she thought it was the greatest thing. And there were a couple times when I was like, are you sure you're getting everything down? Like, could you please stop taking, like, this isn't a lecture. Like, what are you doing?
See the smoke coming up from the pad and paper.
Every word that was coming out of this doctor's mouth, she was like, I need to get all this information about the T cells and the whatever. Like, she's taking notes. And everyone else is trying to eat their catered dinner and like mind their own business. And she's just like, this is fascinating. I'm like, I am glad my cancer could provide you a night of learning. I'm really so happy you came with me. But what I was on was Opdivo, which you kind of see now. There are commercials. I was with M, our friend Emily, whose last name I'm not going to throw out into the universe. I was with M in Utica, and we were in a bar, and on the TV, there was a commercial, and M goes, look, it's a commercial for Opdivo. And I'm like, no way. And then I look, and it's actually starting to be advertised now for use with lung cancer. But obviously mine was for melanoma. And it's just an infusion. It can be given to you in differing amounts. But what it does, instead of killing cells like other treatments do, it revs up your body's immune system to have the body fight cancer on its own, pretty much. But then as a result, what kind of happened was, you could have autoimmune side effects, which was wonderful, because they were like, oh yeah, so like your kidneys could swell, this could swell, that could swell, like every organ in your body could like swell dramatically, and it could be really dangerous. But oh yeah, just that's nothing. And I kind of figured after a certain point, like I was going to get no side effects. But what happened to me was my pituitary gland actually got swollen. So I had to take a break for a month, which extended my treatment schedule. But you just pretty much got this infusion because it didn't kill any cells. I didn't lose my hair. I definitely didn't lose weight. I look, with the exception of 2 dry patches and like bumps on my arms from the 900,000 times they would have to stick me to get the IV to stay. I literally was pretty much known as a problem child in the infusion bay at the hospital. It got to a point where after a certain amount of months, I would sit there and I would wait like an extra 2 hours if it meant I could have this one nurse who for some reason could get me on the first try. Her name is Mary Reiner. She's a sweet angel. And she would see me and she would go, I'm not you today. No. And then just like walk in the other direction.
Oh gosh.
And then she would come back and do it, of course. But that was it. I would just come. I would go for 30 minutes once a month for a full year. But that was just very interesting because that year coincided with pretty much my senior year of college, or what should have been my senior year of college, but was my senior fall semester and my first 6 months working for New York State. I am a communications coordinator for an assemblyman. So it's just some social media stuff, some scheduling things. And I am the banks committee clerk for the New York State Assembly. So when all the assembly people get together and they talk about banking legislation. Sexy, I know. I tabulate the votes. That's part of my job, which is always really kind of fun because I like seeing the discourse between different people on the committee. And I mean, if there is any, because usually I don't think banking legislation is too highly contested, but I enjoy it. And that job I got just a couple months before I finished my infusion.
It seems like a really great opportunity. I'm glad that you have that there. And I remember that one time that I visited the state building and I saw you there at work. It was like, she's all at work. Go, Aileen. Yes.
I saw on social media, on like one of the school social media pages, that there were people from the college downstairs, and I saw you in one of the pictures, and I was like, I need to go find Conor. Like, I have to go. I slipped you my business card, and I think the representative from the college was very confused.
Yeah, that was like right after I finished my speech too. I was asked to speak at that event, and you caught me like right at that. And and I was like, Aileen!
Yeah, I was happy to hear you speak. You gave a good speech. That was good. I mean, that was always a fun part of working there. You know, when things were the way that they were. I try to not say normal, but because what is normal? But when the LOB, the Legislative Office Building, is normally in session, there are things going on in that space all the time, almost every day. So it was kind of fun on like a lunch break or something to just go down and see what was happening or who was in for the day. And of course, that's not happening. That's not happening right now. I was just getting used to working in an office, and then the world shut down. Pretty much is what happened.
Speaking with the world shutdown and all, that brings me to kind of, you know, here we are into COVID and all that. Your diagnosis and your treatment started well before COVID, but there was still the overlap to it as well. And could you tell about some of that overlap for us?
So there definitely was a couple months of overlap, and it got scary because I knew that my immune system certainly wasn't weakened with COVID because it was revved up on purpose, but you know, you're still putting a certain amount of like medicine into your body, and I had to have a lot of conversations with my doctors. I have a whole team. Oh gosh, I have a whole team. And that's not something a lot of people our age can say, that I'm like, oh, I have my oncologist and my phlebotomist and my nurse navigator and all these different people. Just a lot of conversations with them about like what I could do and what I couldn't do. So I had a couple more months of infusion that I had to receive after March. So I had March, April, and then May because we got pushed back a month. And then at that last one was the one where I could ring the bell because I was done with the infusion part of my treatment. It was like a struggle to get my mom into the building because we still didn't really know at that time a lot of like what was going on with COVID and how it was spread or what was going on. So I was allowed to come in for my infusion, obviously, but normally my mom would have come with me and my dad would be in the waiting room, and that wasn't happening. So when I rang my bell and I completed that phase, I was with my mom. Thankfully, they let her in, but like my dad was in the car. We couldn't go. Normally what we would do, it was just kind of like a tradition after a certain point. After my first appointment, my nurse navigator, Queen Angela Miller, queen of my life, I cannot explain to you the love I have for this woman. Oh my God, she's an angel with the biggest wedding ring setup you've ever seen in your life. Oh my gosh, I'm obsessed with it. I'm obsessed with her. She is just one tough cookie. Am I hyping her up in hopes that she'll listen to this? Absolutely.
Heck yeah.
But she kind of pretty much said after the first appointment, we were just really hungry. We were like, oh, where can we go? Like, what's around here? And we went to BJ's Brew House, and she was like, get a Pizookie and just call it a day. But then every single time we went, we would just get a Pizookie and call it a day. But then we couldn't do that after COVID. Yeah. So like all I wanted, like for my last time that I was like really going out there to get infusion, was to just be able to sit there and have that. And we couldn't do that. But I rang my bell, and instead of being like, oh my gosh, like this is great, like this is fantastic, I kind of was like, okay, I need hand sanitizer because I just touched something that other people touched, and I need to get back out to the car because I don't want to be in the hospital longer than I need to be in the hospital. Yeah. Like Mary, who I brought up before, the nurse who would put my IV in, she was like, oh, like let's take a picture together. But like by picture, it's like me taking a selfie and my mom and Mary except no one's touching each other. Like, they're like, yay, but like 3 feet apart from one another. Like, it's very, it was before we all thought it was okay pretty much to just wear like cloth masks or something. So I had this like big N95 with like a filter on. Like, it's just, you could tell, you can feel the uncomfortability in the pictures. And then after that finished, I started taking my BRAF inhibitor medication. So that's 2 different pills, multiple times a day. One of them's refrigerated. This upcoming March, we're coming on 2 years. But it's just changed everything. Now when I go to these appointments, you know, only my mom can come in. We have the masks on the entire time. Sometimes I'll see my PA, Dr. Lauren. The past 2 times I've gone, she's come from wherever she's been held hostage in the hospital, and she's like, I just have to see you, hi, ah. And we just like yell at each other, and she runs in the other direction. But that's like never how it was. Legitimately dolphin noises. She's so much fun. Conor, you would love her. But she, like, the way it used to be, it was almost like, I know this sounds ridiculous, but it was almost like a social hour. Like, Dr. Nair would come in, Angela would come in, Lauren would come in, and we just like catch up. They would just ask me how I was doing and how everything was going. And it was especially after I started to come to terms with the fact that I needed a little bit more support than I wanted to let on, because Angela Miller, Queen, who I love, used to call me so much at the start of my treatment. And as I was adjusting to the infusion, I was either at home in my bed sleeping, which I don't think a lot of people at St. Rose realize, was if I wasn't at campus, I was at home asleep. It did not matter what time of day it was, I was out. And she would call me to check in on me, and I would just send it right to voicemail. And if she called me when I was at St. Rose, I'd be in the theater or something. We'd be out for lunch, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know, like, oh, I gotta take my call from my nurse navigator. Like, that's not something 21, 22-year-old people say. So I would just send her to voicemail there too. But then after a while, I was like, oh my gosh, this woman's done out to get me. Like, she really actually cares about me. Like, I think in a way that, at least it feels like to me, that's a little bit more than, you know, than just like what her job entails. I gotta pick up the phone. Like, I gotta be nice. I gotta answer her emails. Like, but with treatment before and after COVID, but I feel like especially after COVID, I started to accept that help that was trying to be given to me. And that's when it became really easy for me to start talking more about stuff in a way that's still even different from the column that I wrote for the Chronicle, because that was helpful and cathartic and something I never thought I would have ever done ever in my life. It still went through 2 rounds of editing before anyone ever saw it. So it gave me a little bit more time to maybe take some of the things that I was saying and tone it back a little, or be a little bit more reserved. But that was a huge thing that I did. And that was a fun way for me in school to see which of my friends were reading the Chronicle and which ones weren't. Because the ones who weren't, when I told them I had cancer, they were like, what? I was like, oh, I've been writing about that publicly for a month and a half. Good to know that you have not, in fact, been reading the paper.
You're mentioning about the article and how that was kind of like an entrance to how you're talking about things. You also had like a Instagram takeover that you did that one time, and that's the thing that kind of like that knock is like, hello, Conor, and it was a wake-up call on my end, and I thought it was a really cool thing that you were doing there, and it was a cool thing that the people that you were working with. Could you tell about what you were doing with them and what that group does?
So Elephants and Tea magazine is one of quite a few adolescent and young adult cancer resources that are kind of out there on the market that I really didn't have any clue existed until well into my treatment. The college actually wrote something up about an alum from the 90s. Her name is Megan Claire Chase, and she also is an adult, adolescent young adult cancer survivor, because a lot of people don't realize that you are AYA if you're diagnosed before you're 45. So if you were diagnosed with cancer, you could be 30 with 3 kids. You're still a young adult diagnosis, which is something that once I knew that, it made a lot more sense, because Dr. Nair used to tell me all the time that there were 2 other girls who had melanoma really bad, but they're also young adults. So maybe we could connect and like get to know each other or whatever. And they were both like closer to 30, but one of them like had children already. Like they definitely had been like working and paying taxes for a significant amount of time, and like I was still in college. So we like exchanged phone numbers and stuff, but like we wound up never reaching out to each other because we were so different in age. And I was like, I didn't make sense to me why he called them young adults, because when he said young adults, I was thinking it was gonna be like a Fault in Our Stars situation where it was someone who was gonna be like my age. But then once I learned that was the technical term, was before 45, I was like, oh, like that's why he said that. So Elephants and Tea they were just asking for some people like who would be willing to share. And I kind of sent my column along and I said, this is something that I've done. Like I'm very interested in like talking about it and sharing my experience. And this goes back to what we were talking about before. The column that won a New York State Press Association award, it was 3rd place, but considering what the column was about, I was very surprised.
Definitely.
It was the one where I wrote about immunotherapy and how, because it didn't change how I looked, it afforded me some degree of normalcy for the entire time, because you didn't look at me and go, oh, well, that's a cancer patient. That's someone who has cancer, because I just looked like how I always had looked. So I sent them my column and I said I had won an award for this writing and I would love to be able to do this. And they said, yeah, like that sounds great. And I've done a couple other things. I attended a few of their Gab Fest sessions this year. So that's a week long. Yeah, they set up like free courses for like pretty much like life after diagnosis. So like discussions on when to make the disclosure when you're dating. Like if you're on a dating app and it comes to a point where it's like, oh, well, like here's a part of my life. Like, how do you bring that up? Because that's a whole other conversation for another time. You have some people who are like, oh, that's great. Like you're kicking cancer's ass. And then I've had some people get very mad at me for not saying something sooner. They get very offended and upset. And I imagine it has to do with their own experiences with cancer. But that's just like a whole thing that they offer discussions on, and nutrition and all sorts of other things. There's also Lacuna Loft, which is a great resource. And these resources are there for the patients and their families, which is what I think is really important, because, you know, it's obviously very stressful for the person going through it, but their support system needs help as well. Because like I said, now like a long time ago, you know, no one really tells a parent like this is what you do when your kid is faced with this set of circumstances. And I would always think of you know, my little sister throughout the entire time, like how she was doing with everything, and she didn't really necessarily talk about it too much. It was mostly her boyfriend. Her boyfriend, I think, got her to almost come around about the whole situation, because she would be angry or frustrated with me or something that I was doing, as sisters do, but more than normal, I will admit. That was happening much more frequently. And Stephen would go, Carl, you can't do that. She has cancer. He would just take a basic argument and he would just make light of the situation, which of course, like, it doesn't work for everybody, but that's part of what these resources do as well. Like they just share differing perspectives on the whole situation. Like there was one Gab Fest session that I sat in on that talked about cancer and storytelling, and how you know, sharing these experiences doesn't necessarily have to be doom and gloom, end of the world kind of a situation, which is something that I think that I had already been doing. I did a video for the Remote Relay for Life last year that some people had reached out to me and said, like, you know, your perspective is just very positive. And that's not to say that I haven't, you know, had my times of struggle, but you almost have to laugh at it. Oh gosh, because some of the things are just so crazy and ridiculous that come with it. But that there's a whole community out there to kind of help you get through that, and that's part of Elephants and Tea, and that's why I was so happy to do what I did. And I hope to do more of their programming in the future, because once you're a AYA diagnosed person, like there's the before and there's the after, and there are some people who are going to understand your experience because they've been there, and there are some people who I hope to God they never know, because it's really wacky.
Coming from myself, I've never had cancer, but my mom had cancer, my godmother had cancer, and I seen it through their eyes. It's an interesting thing, and you know, through the storytelling and through sharing experiences helps broaden people's enlightenment and perspective of things, to understand how to treat each other, how to treat things moving forward when it happens to them or something along those lines. It's a scary thing, regardless of whatever side you are participating in it on, and to what degree, what stage, what this and what that, you know, people being outspoken about things definitely, it does form that community, as you say. To wrap things up, you're a natural storyteller, you're an actor, you write beautifully for your columns with the Chronicle, and just now here you are coming out and telling your story in this way. How do you feel that it's been, just going out and telling your story and sharing it with other people? What has that meant to you, and how have you felt personally through that? And how is that, like, has that kind of been therapeutic of any sense in your own journey?
This is actually a really, really good question. With the writing specifically, that kind of got me on this role of telling my story and sharing, and I hope not what most people would consider oversharing, but sharing was with Kaylin. I had sent her this award just as a joke, and this is what started the column. There's an award for excellence in cancer journalism, which I didn't even realize was a beat. Like, I didn't think that was a thing that people wrote about for newspapers. So I just had sent it to her and been like, haha, like, what if I wrote something about my experience? And she said, no, like, that's not a joke. Like, you really should do that. Like, that probably will help you. And it did. And I find that the more I talk about it, the less it becomes about me. And the more I'm hoping it does touch some other people, because a lot of people are still afraid to talk about cancer, even if it's not happening to them, if it is happening to someone around them. And I try to tell my story. I know this is very, very cliche, but I try to tell my story for people who can't. I kind of mentioned to you that I feel like all the time, there's part of me that feels imposter syndrome about it, because my cancer really wasn't that bad. But the reality of the situation was my cancer really wasn't great. I just didn't struggle with treatment like some other people do. But like I tell my story to normalize it for other people, and it has helped me. And I think about my cousin who passed away earlier this year from cancer. She had brain cancer. She was very, very young.
I'm so sorry.
And thank you. I wasn't abundantly close with her, but I see her family. I frequently wonder when I see them post on Facebook and stuff. I do ask myself, like, why wasn't that me? Like, how did she suffer like this and I haven't suffered like this? And that's why, oh God, I know this is so cliche, but I almost feel like it's my duty. I feel like it's my duty. I feel like I was given some sort of a mountain so I could show other people that mountains can be moved, and make it feel normal. And because it's nothing to be scared of, and we need to call it what it is, so it doesn't have power over how we live our day-to-day lives. We have to say cancer. We have to say what it is, because I love my grandfather, not the one that I live with, but my other one. he calls it that thing you're going through, that thing you got going on. And I go, you mean my cancer? Like, say it.
Voldemort syndrome.
Voldemort really bad. So I mean, so all of this writing and storytelling, like you said, it's something that does feel very natural to me, but the importance is increasing, because that same family friend, and it's something that I wish I could have talked to her more about before she passed away. So much I wish I could have talked to her about, because I was not diagnosed until well after she passed away. But she wrote me once in a letter, and she said, I see my siblings be so honest with their children, and I think it's so admirable, because no one should be kept in the dark if they have questions. And that was about wasn't necessarily about a completely different thing, but I've kind of taken that sentiment behind those words that she wrote to me when I was still in high school. But I've kind of tried to take that idea and that energy and try to give that to other people. No one should be left in the dark. People should understand that there are options and there are hope. And when something like this happens to someone you love, or maybe you, that it doesn't necessarily have to be the end of the world or the end of them, or it's so many people are so scared. Don't run away from people who are going through this, because I think the best way to put it, at the end of the day, I think the reason why I've held on to the storytelling so much and the sharing my experience so much is so that people know that I have had all of this happen to me, but at the end of the day, I'm still Aileen. I had this stuff going on. I've had this stuff going on. Yes, maybe I had to go home a weekend a month for a year, and I have these doctors, and maybe when I go home to Pennsylvania, I'm just as excited to see Angela, my nurse navigator, as I am to see my friends from high school. But I still like watching the Giants games on Sundays. I still want nothing more than to go play trivia at juniors on Thursday night. Like, I'm still who I am, and I can have all of this happen to me. But at the core of it all, I like to tell jokes. I like to talk to people. And if I want to talk to them about Opdivo and nivolumab and IV sticks, or if I want to talk to them about these gingerbread man earrings that I found on Etsy, like, I'm still the same person. And it's not an easy subject, but the more we talk about it, the easier it's going to become. And in talking about it and in talking about the struggle, we can honor people like Lauren, like Mary, like these people who lived with cancer. Because fighting, I saw this in Alex Trebek's autobiography, and I have never identified with someone's writing more. Fighting implies that there's a winner and a loser, and that there's something you could have done differently to win the fight. It's not that simple. We want it to be that simple because we're human. There's nothing I've done differently. I've just been lucky enough to have everything work, right? So because it worked for me, I'm gonna keep telling my story, because I feel like I can, and I feel like I should, and I am going to shut up now. Thank you.
What you're saying is so inspiring, and yeah, the call to arms that you got from this experience, and I know a number of people do when they go through something, they want to share to help others and all that, but then there are also plenty of people who don't too. So the fact that you have that call to arms mentality just shows something about you and your character and your strength, and that's huge and inspiring. And you say that, it wasn't that bad, but it was still kind of bad. It wasn't the traditional mainstream thing, but your struggles were real and you went through them, and now you're turning those struggles into something positive for other people and yourself moving forward. that's extremely responsible, mature, altruistic, humane. It's amazing.
Conor, don't give me a big head, Conor.
But Aileen, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story with everybody on Walsh Wednesday. I think, a number of people greatly could take something out of this, and whether it's they went through it in the past, they're going through it right now, or it's something they go through in the future. I think it's stories and inspirations like yourself that will really help keep moving others forward as well. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. This has been the best possible first podcast experience.
Yes. Heck yeah. Glad to make it a good experience for you. Thank you for your honesty and your vulnerability for this. We greatly appreciate it.
And that brings us to the end of this week's episode. Again, I'd like to thank Aileen so much for coming on and talking about her experiences. It's always a pleasure to get to work with her, and I'm so glad to have her on this episode. Today's cover art is actually a portion of the cover art for Aileen's memoir, Blueberries, which was provided by Juliette Prueitt. We will be sure to keep you updated about the release of the memoir. But until then, as always, I'm glad we get to spend some time.